Namaskara and welcome to BIC Talks, a podcast by Bangalore International Centre, bringing you conversations that move, inform, and encourage discourse.
We tend to, as fans, look at sport as something different from the society. As a journalist, as a sport journalist, as a cricket writer, we all also write on cricket without realizing that it's not happening in a vacuum. If there is violence going on around, it deeply impacts the players. They also represent different sections of the society. It's not as if they have just been transplanted on the cricket ground and then they go back to some heaven and then come back and they are not aware of what's happening. Because a lot of these events impacted me, in turn, how I started seeing the game also changed.
Journalist and editor Prem Panikar engages author and cricket writer Pradeep Magazine in a conversation about his journey as a reporter. This episode of BIC Talks is adapted from a session at Bangalore Literature Festival 2022.
We're not really going to talk about the content of the book so much as some of the surrounding issues. So Pradeep, when you did your first book, Not Quite Cricket, that was almost a documentary. You were chronicling certain illicit activities that were going on beneath the surface of the sport that we all watch and love. This book, though, not just cricket, I read it, I stepped back, and what occurred to me was that it's immensely rich in stories and anecdotes, descriptions, all of that. But what struck me was that you have framed it against the world outside the boundary. So you begin, obviously, with the history of Kashmir, the Exodus, and all of that. But for example, covering cricket in Chandigarh, Punjab region during the height of the Khalistan movement and the violence. You've written about covering cricket in Pakistan at the time of Indira Gandhi's assassination. You've talked about covering cricket during Blue Star. Various seismic events that were happening in the world reflects in this book, and cricket is sort of an enabling mechanism for you to talk about that and vice versa. I wanted to know what the thinking was, what inspired you to do that, what was the motivation, how did you get to that structure?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me here. Look, it has to do a lot with my age as well. I was older, much older than when I wrote Not Quite Cricket, which are my experiences of Indian cricket and match fixing. I reflected, publishers wanted me to write a big book on Indian cricket history. I thought that I had a lot of other experiences because I happen to be a Kashmiri. It's a conflict area. I'm a Kashmiri Pandit by birth. Then I happened to live in Punjab, which is during the period of height of terrorism, Mandal, Mandir-Masjid demolition, events which deeply impacted those generation which was living then. I was one of them. And as a middle class boy, as a lower middle class boy, I wanted to capture the story of not just me, but the people I represented, and how we are not aware of our history and we learn on the job or while growing up, we learn things which we are not aware of. And because we are not aware of, we are not told, it can shape us differently. Somebody may go to the extreme right, somebody may go to the extreme left. Plus my experience of covering cricket, covering big international stars, their stories. So I thought I'll combine them, place the whole cricketing narrative in a social, political context. I had a lot of stories to tell, I think. If you read the book, you'll realize that there is not a single page which is not anecdotal. I'm not judgmental. I'm recording events. Judgments come from the narration, from the thread of the storyline, which is completely anecdotal. Be it Tendulkar, be it Ganguly, be it Pataudi, be it Kapil Dev, be it Gavaskar. Every story is them speaking, me being an eyewitness, and I thread that story through these anecdotes.
There are a couple of things you spoke about that I want to get back to a little later in this, but you talked about your awareness of all that was going on, and in your book, for instance, you talk about how when Khalistan is going on and when Blue Star happens, your relationships with, say, friends who are from the Sikh community, they start to slightly change, shift. Some stay the same, some change in ways that couldn't have been anticipated. The same thing happens with the Babri Masjid and the Rath Yatra, the Babri Masjid, and the violence that period spawned. I wanted to know, when you look at sport through the prism of contemporary events, does the sport itself change, or does your view of the sport change, or are they two separate buckets that happen to coexist?
We tend to, as fans, look at sport as something different from the society. As a journalist, as sport journalist, as a cricket writer, we all also write on cricket without realizing that it's not happening in a vacuum. If there is violence going on around, it deeply impacts the players. They also represent different sections of the society. It's not as if they've just been transplanted on the cricket ground and then they go back to some heaven and then come back and they're not aware of what's happening. Because a lot of these events impacted me, in turn, how I started seeing the game also changed. It changed my perspective and it placed me also in situations where I would listen, I won't get too much involved, I wouldn't become too much judgmental, as I said earlier. I record. In the book, like when I started writing it, I made myself a promise that, look, I'm not going to say this is wrong, that's right. I'm going to just record. And in that recording, you will find that there are intimate conversations with almost all the top cricketers of that time. Right from, as I said, Tiger Pataudi to Ganguly, Greg Chappellala, Dravid, their fights. And these are dressing room inside accounts, which even the players can't deny because they have talked to me. I'm recording them. It's not as if I am passing a judgment that, look, I think this happened. My being placed in certain situations may have created a different narrative. Somebody else may have a different perspective of the same events, but I come from a perspective of an eyewitness.
The way you see the sport changes simply because you're also aware of and intimately connected with that larger world and all the seismic events that are going on around you. The other part of it is I was looking for common themes throughout the book. And one of the things I noticed, board politics, how elections, so-called, are fixed in this thing. The various state associations and the skullduggery that they get up to. The money and the corruption that pervades the sport. The spot fixing. Now, any of those could have been written last week, or even this week for that matter. You've been writing about this from the mid to late 80s, as far as I recall, the 90s, definitely, all of that. The question is, Pradeep, after all this being brought out into the open, after this spotlight being shined on this over and over and over again, why are we still in this position? Why are we still manipulating elections? Associations are doing their own thing, and selections, for instance, are being massaged. Why are we never able to get out of this?
Well, I think that will be a difficult question to answer why. But it is happening. It's happening. It's maybe happening even far more than what was happening earlier. In my book, I start from the board politics. I describe again anecdotally interesting stories, if you happen to read the book, how Prime Minister VP Singh intervened to get Madhav Sindhya elected as the board president in 1990. How a few years later, kidnapping takes place for an election because of Assam vote has to be bought, and that Assam voter is not with one side, it is with the other side, but that one side kidnaps that voter, and how Madhav Sindhya uses his influence to get that voter change his mind and get Dalmia elected as board president. So these are stories which obviously must be happening even now. They are happening, we all know. But unfortunately, except for very few people, very rare people, Sharda is here who writes on these issues, one or two more people maybe. These stories never come out. Newspaper reporting or TV reporting is either gossip or full of lavish psychophancy.
All of this despite the fact that in recent times, actually, the Supreme Court tried to bring change, which has now been completely reversed. And
well, we know why Supreme Court did what did. Everyone knew that Supreme Court is their own verdict, their own judgment, which the board defied, and yet they allowed them to not only defy it, but say, okay, carry on. We know there is who rules this country, and we know who rules the Indian board. So I don't think I need to say anything more.
But, yeah. But as a sports journalist, when that happens, when you find the same thing, like Yogi Berra once said, deja vu all over again, Does that create depression? Does it say, I mean, it's not worth doing anymore? Do you get that kind of a sort of, what am I doing this for?
I was, as a reporter, when I was reporting, I was an angry man, but I am no longer angry. It's happening. I don't like it. I still write about it whenever I get the opportunity. The book is written only last year, which has a lot of present things also. It has about IPL spot fixing. Yes. It has about how one World Cup star of 2011 was almost caught. He survived only because the investigating officer who was probing the match fixing IPL scandal didn't have the time because the court had given him limited period. And he in his report wrote that this needs further investigation to find out whether that player was, how much was he involved or whether he was actually involved or not. I hope that the present generation reporters carry on writing. That's the only hope we have, because people need to know all sides of a story, not just one side.
Another thing that keeps coming up during the narrative, a sort of common thread, is the internal politics that sometimes happens between players or between players and coaches, etc. So you go back to the days of Sunny Gavaskar and Kapil Dev, for instance, and then there is the Sachin Azhar conflicts, or Saurav Ganguly, Greg Chappell, etc. But what struck me as an occasional journalist was that typically what happens when these things happen is we instinctively tend to take sides. So the writing is also colored by the fact that I think this guy is right and this guy is wrong. This guy is the hero of the story. This guy is the villain of the story. But what is noticeable about the way you have captured those controversies, those conflicts, is that you somehow sort of seem to be able to distance yourself. There are no heroes and villains. There is just, here are the facts and do what you want with it, kind of a detachment. How does that come about? I mean, I've never been able to sort of detach from what I'm writing.
I'd seen a film when I was in the university in 70s, Kursova's Rashomon Gate. It's a story of 5 people, a murder takes place, and all people have a different story to say about the same thing. And there is, the narrator is the hero and others are the villains, and it keeps changing. So there is no one truth. Lately, I am into Buddhism, and it talks about causes and conditions. Everything is dependent, arising, and everything happens because of certain causes and conditions. If in the book I look at, say, Kapil and Gavaskar having differences with each other, I see that Kapil had a different reason, different cause. Gavaskar's reaction was because of his causes and conditions. Who is wrong, who is right here is like how you take the narration. I am not intervening. There must be a judgment there, but I try to hide it as much as possible. It's not just about them, it's about Pakistan when I write there. There are my 3 trips to Pakistan. There is the whole Kashmir problem. I look at it, the Kashmiri Pandits exodus, the Muslim issue. I look at it, I think, with a gentle gaze, and I try to be empathetic with both sides rather than being judgmental and harsh.
Yeah, I was waiting for that word empathy, because that's what I was just going to ask you as a follow-up. There is a distinct sense of empathy which allows you to see both sides of the issue. And
you look at Ganguly, Dravid, Greg Chappell issue. Now you look at the book, I have Ganguly's version. I mean, these are eyewitness conversations. I have Dravid's side of it. I may not have as much Greg Chappell in it, because if I have not seen, looked at empathy with a very couple of people, one of them I think probably is Greg in the book, which I shouldn't have maybe, but maybe I took sides there. See, empathy is not that you're saying nothing wrong has happened. Empathy is in the sense that yes, this wrong has happened, but there are reasons for why it may have happened. So that's what I've tried to do in the book, whether it's the cricket part of it, whether it is political part of it. And for me, the major challenge apart from this was how to mix the two, how to make the book readable, how to make it an interesting read, where you don't feel that cricket is separate and the political part is separate. So that was a bigger challenge. I think I didn't do a bad job of it.
I mean, that's why I brought that up as the first thing to ask you. How did you manage to blend the two worlds so seamlessly together? Among the many things I envy you for, one of them is that you got to start your career covering domestic at a time when domestic cricket had value. It was followed intensely. As a kid, I've gone to Chepauk to watch Ranji Trophy with houseful audiences. The value of domestic, obviously, I mean, for the players, it is that proving ground that then qualifies them for the national team, etc. But for a journalist, it's also that learning experience. You get to, because of the access that you get to players and their willingness to explain things to you, you get to actually learn. I mean, am I making too much of it, or is that was that useful for you?
Sports writing, or if I have done Major League Cricket writing, it helps you to see the world. Like, I've traveled across the breadth and length of the country, seen the country because of cricket coverage. I traveled across the cricketing world wherever cricket was played. So it opens your eyes to a world which is very different from your own. I think that's one of the subtle themes of the book, is that the world out there has so much of diversity, so many different, like I talk about diaspora, I talk about a couple in the West Indies of Indian descent.
Yeah.
They invite me home for dinner and they play Lata Mangeshkar songs, they start crying. Until then, they are West Indian speaking people. I ask them, do you speak? I didn't know you know Hindi. They say, no, we don't. And yet that cultural roots, that longing for it, be it in Australian, my friend in Australia is an Australian citizen, he used to show his kids a film called Hum Saath Saath Hain, based on India's conservative religious practices. But she wanted her children to, because she thought they are living in a society which has a very liberal, different cultural atmosphere. So she was showing them that film thinking that they will imbibe that. So I bring all these things to just show the diversity, that how people react in different situations to different things.
Pradeep, you've seen cricket coverage evolve from print, where the match got over, you had the time to sort of sit back and reflect and write, to digital, where in football writing there is this phrase, send in your report on the whistle, which means the referee's whistle goes and your report should be in the inbox. And because of this transition, the nature of our coverage is also, and you've seen those changes, you've been part of those changes. Where do you think we're going after this?
I think cricket writing is more or less, how I look at it at the moment, is more or less dead, because people watch on television, they don't want to read what is written about the match, which is unfortunate from a journalistic perspective, because there has been tremendous quality writing. Even today's writers, Cricinfo had great bunch of writers. Why I'm saying this is because I'm not saying that the old generation were great writers. No, they're wonderful writers at the moment, but where is the opportunity? Where is the platform? So which is unfortunate. T20 language is evolving, how to write on T20. People who are trying to interpret T20 through traditional cricket equipment, traditional cricket terms are like, it's not the same. You're just 20 overs. You can't put a test cricketer's cap and say, oh, he played badly, he played well. No, it's a different game. So it's evolving. I don't know where it will head.
Thank you for staying on for the full conversation. If you liked what you heard, please share it with family and friends. You can also leave us a review on iTunes or Apple Podcasts. The crew that makes these podcasts possible are Gaurav Krishna and Ishan Gupta on sound supervision and production, with support from S. Sarvanaraj and Raghavendra Tenkaila. Artwork and design is by Chandani Venkataraman of Crisscross Design Studios. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel on your favorite podcast platform. It can also be accessed on our website, bangaloreinternationalcentre.org. Do follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter to get regular updates on our programming. This is Lekha Naidu signing off on behalf of everyone at BIC.